Welcome to Day 3 of the Kolbe Convention, Episode 111. Today, Bonnie, Jordan, and I are joined by Therese Prudlo and her husband, Dr. Don Prudlo, Dr. Carl Hasler, and Michelle Kim to discuss the treasures that can be found in Greek history, literature, and philosophy, and why this study is such an important part of Kolbe's curriculum. We're certainly blessed to have such wise and thoughtful people as part of our Kolbe community. I know you'll enjoy this conversation about the treasures that we have inherited from the ancient Greeks, and I hope that you'll enjoy the show.
Hi there, I'm Bonnie, liturgical musician, popcorn and podcast fanatic, and Kolbe homeschooling mom to 4 lads and lasses of middle and high school age.
And this is Stephen, homeschooling father of 5 and director of development for Kolbe Academy.
And I'm Jordan. As a product of homeschooling, I'm proud to teach Greek and Latin for Kolbe online and serve as the Alumni and Public Relations Director.
For more than a few Kolbe Academy students and their families, the 9th grade year is their first introduction to Kolbe, classical education, primary sources, and names like Herodotus and Homer. This foundational year sets the stage for a transformative high school experience, hopefully rich in discovery and influential in the forming of young people who know truth in person and themselves, or are at least headed that way. Our KolbeCast convention continues today with a gathering of folks who are well-versed in subjects that together play a significant role in the typical freshman year experience of a Kolbe student. We've rounded these instructors up for a roundtable discussion about the Greek year with a sensitivity toward folks who are new to Kolbe, especially in high school, and those who are curious about Catholic classical education. It's my privilege to welcome back to the KolbeCast some familiar voices, starting with Mrs. Therese Prudlo, History Department Chair and Instructor, and her husband, Dr. Don Prudlo, Warren Professor of Catholic Studies in the Department of Philosophy and Religion at the University of Tulsa. Hello, you two. How have you been?
Hi, Bonnie. How are you? Thank you for having us back.
It's great to see you. Don, how are you?
I'm doing fine. Thanks, Bonnie. I appreciate coming back every time.
We're happy to see you. I hear you've been globetrotting a little. That's right in keeping with the theme we seem to be developing this summer here on the KolbeCast. Want to give us a rundown of your recent travels?
Took students from University of Tulsa, many of them Catholics from the Newman Center here, to Rome for 3 weeks. And then I ran an academic conference there. And all the while I had my sidekick, Peter, who's a Kolbe student. And so that we had a great time there.
Wow. Therese, we've been hearing about some changes coming this approaching school year. So would you tell us how you're serving Kolbe Academy these days?
Yes. Well, I'm starting my 7th year here at Kolbe, and I was recently asked to take over the role. I'll be helping out as department chair going forward here at the history department. So I'm some really big shoes to fill as Ann Angstberger, she's retired this year, but I'm excited. I'm excited for things to come.
In good hands with you. So what all are you going to be teaching this coming year?
I will be teaching, our ancient Greek history. I've been doing that since I first started here at Kolbe, and I love it. I'll also be doing our History 11 era of Christendom this year, as well as one of our Western Civ 1 courses, which covers sort of everything from the ancient world all the way up to, through the Middle Ages.
All right. That's quite an array. Okay. No homeroom this year, though.
I do. And yes, I do. I have a homeroom as well. Yes.
Okay.
I always have every year I have a homeroom. Which I really, really, really enjoy. So I'm looking forward. It'll be a 9th grade this year. Sometimes I switch back and forth, but 9th grade homeroom this year. Yes. Michelle and I will be doing that together. We're very excited.
That all goes together. Yeah. Oh, fortunate students. We are also happy to have Dr. Carl Hasler back with us. Hello, Carl. How's next year looking for you teaching-wise?
Hi, Bonnie. How are you?
All right.
Gosh, it's been already a hectic summer. I'm been asked to teach History 12, American history, which, since I've lived through a good portion of it, it's not that difficult, but still, there's a lot of reading to get under my belt. Plus, continual preparations for the courses that I've already taught in the previous years. So I'm getting ready to go already.
It's going to be here before we know it. I think we're just hurtling through summertime here. Yeah.
Indeed.
Mrs. Michelle Kim has graced the Kolbe cast a few times now, and yes, we'll have links to previous episodes to which these cast members have contributed in the show notes. Michelle, it looks like you'll be teaching a stout load of classes yourself this coming year. Would you tell us which?
I get to teach English composition and grammar for the high schoolers again, like I did last year, as well as English 10 composition and logic. So I have the first year of those 2 courses under my belt and get to do that again. And then I get to teach Greek literature this year for the first time with children other than my own, students other than my own children. And I'll have homeroom 9 again as well. And then very exciting too, Kolbe is adding writing workshops this coming school year. And so I'll have the beginning writers workshop for the high schoolers as well.
Oh, that'll be great. They will really benefit from that, from your guidance there. Dr. Jordan Almanzar, skipper of the Kolbe cast, is with us today with plenty to contribute to this conversation. Hi, Jordan. How's your year ahead looking?
Hey, Bonnie. My year's looking busy like usual, teaching a bunch of classes, trying to get as much writing done as I can before all that starts. So the time's just flying by like usual.
It is faster all the time. And another person with firsthand experience in these topics is my co-host, Stephen Hayden. Hi, Stephen.
Hello.
Who's your favorite Greek year personality, be they deity or mortal?
Oh, Achilles. It has to be Achilles.
Okay, how come?
Well, basically, at least he represents kind of the magnanimous man. I mean, the great souled person who thinks about things beyond this world. He's first time reading through, I was definitely a Hector guy, but then going back through the Iliad, it's just, boy, how can you not just admire the greatness of Achilles?
Okay. All right. Well, that is a great segue into this roundtable discussion we're going to be setting you all up to have today. Jordan, I will turn it over to you to get that going.
Yeah, sure thing. I appreciate everybody jumping on here with us. It's a good cast for this Kolbe cast. A nice group of people. Every time that somebody asks, who should we have featured in this week or whatever, I'm always trying to plug in Don Prudlo. So I suggest him for pretty much everything. So I'm glad you came. Glad you came to join us. This is sort of built as a roundtable discussion, as we mentioned. So it's a little bit different than our normal episodes that we do, which are more Q&A style. I have a degree in history and literature, but they don't ever allow me to teach those courses. I always just teach languages. So I'm going to rely on you guys to speak from your teaching experience. And I guess the first thing that maybe the listeners would be interested in is what exactly are these sequences that you find so often in classical programs? We have it here at Kolbe, and it's sort of a sequence that goes that follows an order: Greek, Roman, and then medieval, then modern, when you're going through history. And I want to see, I guess, why this sequence, and why do we start with the Greeks? So I don't know. I'm thinking Carl may have some insight to this here. Carl, do you want to explain this a little bit?
Oh, well, let's see. Why begin with the Greeks? Well, I thought about this earlier today, and it seems to me that Greek literature, Greek philosophy is foundational to Christian theology. The early Christian thinkers had to appeal to the Greek intellects, and they had to appeal to the Greek intellects by knowing their literature. Not that they agreed with everything that went on in the philosophical literary world, but they had to have a sense of it in order to be able to communicate with that society. The world that Christianity comes out of is a Greco-Roman world, really a Greco world with Roman influence to it. So they had to be able to speak to those thinkers and that community. And so the Greeks are the perfect place to begin for a school and a curriculum like Kolbe's. That's what I came up with on the fly this morning when I was thinking about it.
Sounds good to me. What do you guys think?
Certainly coming from a philosophy, well, I mean, kind of liberal arts requirement, but I mean, the idea is brought up, going from Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, the development of those thoughts, and therefore studying the society or studying the literature, the things that are going on in a society that produces that, to me, again, is that foundational sort of thing of Western thought. You can start with the pre-Socratics, I guess, as well, and come up with things that people who are really thinking about things or from great thoughts. It seems like that's the place to start.
I feel like too, it also shows, it's always interesting to see the ninth graders' reactions to this literature and this history. Some of it can be kind of shocking to them, especially if they grew up as homeschoolers. But you can also see this in Greek civilization, the pinnacle of human achievement, but there's such an obvious hole there. And Jesus himself comes along and brings all of that to its true pinnacle. And they're capable at this age of seeing that. And it's really beautiful to see them putting that together.
Yeah, that reminds me of something that Miss Ellen Finnegan said at the graduation recently, when she was referencing "There's nothing new under the sun," and that was the classical world, and that was their understanding that everything revolved, but that the students that go through a program like this, and the Kolbe students specifically, when they hit the incarnation, they can point to it and say, this is new, this is something new. I thought that was an excellent point. So Therese, what do you, I mean, now that you're the department chair, I mean, and you've taught a range of courses, I mean, how do you see this Greek year playing into the goals that we have for the students to see something new?
Well, I think as you are all pointing out, I mean, it's that we view everything through that incarnational lens. We can see the fullness of time, everything leading up, before, coming after. And we go back to the Greeks, because there was something that happened there that was important. I mean, there had to be. Their empire that they created, it didn't last for any period of time. I mean, it goes, and yet everyone keeps referencing back to them. The Romans go back to them, the medievals go back to them. Everyone, why do we keep doing that? And so starting with the Greeks, I think, is important. Something important happened there. It's where we really start to see that written story of human achievements in there, that written history, and the Greeks show us that, and it's going to be taken by our early church fathers, and they discuss this. How do we delve in? Well, there was something important. They had seen something in the Greeks that is going to help lead and help us in our in our journey here. And Don can talk to this even more so than I can, but yeah, I mean, in the whole scope of all the history courses that we have at Kolbe, it's the great starting point, because everything is pointing towards the incarnation, Greeks, Romans, and then later it's pointing back, it's showing it all together working in God's plan, which I think is really great. And that's what we're trying to show them here.
Kolbe does that so well. They put everything into these contexts that lead the student where they need to be to find the truth. And to start with the Greeks are in a lot of ways the original humans. They humanize us because of their achievements. We see glimmers in Sumeria, we see glimmers in Egypt, but nothing comparable to the Greek achievement. In particular, their concept of arete. Stephen was talking about how he has appreciated Achilles again. I'm still an unreconstructed Hector fan, but in Achilles we do see that early type of arete, that excellence and that striving that is so characteristic not only of the Greeks but of the entire Western tradition, the tradition of curiosity and of striving. And then we see Socrates and the sculptors and the lawgivers pulling that down from the clouds and asking the vital question is, what is a good community and what is a good person? And Socrates gives us a very good impression of what a good person looks like in many of the Platonic dialogues that the students are so privileged to read through this period. And then as you go through, you see how it all fits together, how the Romans incorporate this, how the Romans begin to practice what the Greeks preached, as I always tell my students, and then how the incarnation pieces it all together. And that question of Socrates, what is arete for a human, is manifested in the incarnation. And so Kolbe's doing it exactly right.
I thought of something more as everybody was bringing up these. It's like all of these treasures from the Greeks, and then I remembered Euclid, one of my favorites. So that was my first exposure to really pure reasoning. You know, going from principles and I mean, you think just all of the things that you've mentioned, and then I could throw Euclid on top of that too. Even though we might not go through that, but just what treasures remain from that from the Greeks. I mean, that we still have that are unsurpassed through all of these years.
Yeah, and I always think of this this idea that the earliest Christians, although they breathed this Greco-Roman air and they knew it so well, they were just a part of it. It was the zeitgeist even of those early centuries. There was some sort of almost rebellion against it. I don't know if rebellion's the right word, but you see Tertullian and some of these people reacting, and St. Augustine himself sometimes sort of putting down the classical authors. But it feels like in this space of time, how far we've moved, and paganism or the pagan world is no longer a threat, that things gradually became more appreciated by the church, or by the sequence as you go through, maybe by the medieval period or something like that. I do know that my students have a much better grasp of Greek mythology, Greek history than I certainly did at their age, and maybe even at this age. I mean, so I encounter it through teaching Greek or teaching Latin, but they come with this broader knowledge because they've been privy to read all of these texts. And I guess I would just open up the discussion a little bit to the idea of studying ancient history in general in our time. What's the relevance of it? I mean, Dawn, you're at a college, and maybe are you seeing students majoring in this and being interested in these ideas to try to do it professionally, as so many of us are doing it?
Well, we see it in so many ways where they are attempting actively to forget this tradition that gives birth to us. And in doing so, they cut themselves off from the source of their own civilization, even the source of their own particular ideological slants. And by embedding us in this, we embed ourselves not only in our own American experience, right? Our founding fathers look back to Pericles and Lycurgus and the lawgivers of the ancient world. We embed ourselves in the Western tradition and traditions of literature and language, and we embed ourselves in the Christian tradition. And this attempt of collective forgetfulness is poisonous. And when students are exposed to this, they become almost instantly interested in it. We can't forget these things because they make us who we are today. And the more we realize it, the more that we can be ourselves. The Greeks hold a mirror up to ourselves. And when we look at it, we can see, wow, that is us. The more that people try to deface the mirror, the more they will become distant from their own human nature.
And I think a couple of you have already referenced this. We study the Greeks. It's not just in history that we're studying them too. We're doing it in literature. We're doing it in science. We're doing it through philosophy. We're seeing it everywhere, right? Mathematics. It's so important that the basis of who we are, and so much comes from them that it seems to be an appropriate place to begin. And what I love that Kolbe does is they're giving it to you from all the different angles, right? So, I may be reading Herodotus and Thucydides, but I know they're reading Homer over in literature, so and they're covering that, and they're reading different parts of Plato over there. They're reading the Apology, and then I'm doing the Republic, and then in the philosophy classes, they're going to delve more deeply into some of the different thoughts of Socrates and those discussions. I mean, we're trying to really form the whole person by coming at it from all these different areas that are so important.
Yeah, I guess I should have made that clear that you're right. So the Greek year, it isn't just a Greek literature year or a Greek history year, but it's in all the subjects. So they can refer to it, students do, as the Greek year. And it's interesting. I was just thinking about the sequence when I learned Greek before I learned Latin. And I've had multiple classical professors kind of say, well, that's backwards. Like, you learn Latin, then you learn Greek. But when you approach it in these other subject areas, I guess the sequence goes chronologically in many ways, and it really makes sense. Yeah, I'm wondering, Carl, what's been your experience with students coming into your courses, whether theology or whatever, with this background, this kind of deep background in Greek history and literature?
Well, I noticed it a great deal this year in the philosophy class. Most of the students that came into that class had read some of the Greeks, had read some Plato, and that was quite impressive to me. They knew something about Greek history. They had read Plato, they had read St. Augustine, and that made the first semester go very smoothly in a way that I was not expecting. And so that was really interesting to me, and it was a great reflection of the earlier grades and the curriculum at Kolbe. I want to get back a little bit to what was said previously, to follow up on what Don said. I taught at college and university levels for 30 years. And in that entire time, and it was all in public institutions, and in that entire time, it was clear that there was, not to over politicize this too much, but there was an attack against a liberal education, a liberal arts education. I saw classics programs being cut. I saw requirements in philosophy being cut or just eliminated. If in Texas, if they could have cut the history and the government classes, they would have done that, but they're required by law. So there has been a concerted effort for years, for 30 years or more, to minimize and diminish a liberal arts education. And I think it's for the purpose of either dispelling a new storyline or to cut people off from their own story. And one of the great things about Kolbe, and one of the things that I immediately fell in love with when I came here, was we're encouraging the telling of the story, and particularly the telling of the incarnational story. And that, to me, is the saving grace of Kolbe Academy.
Everything you say is absolutely right. And our Christian tradition demands this of us in a way that other traditions don't. There's a tension in Judaism and in Islam between religion and reason and rationality. And there is a tension in Christianity, but we are required by the incarnational principle to hold it together, no matter how difficult that is. And so we often point to Paul at the Areopagus, quoting writers from the Greek tradition. But I think much more deep is the Greek text of the first chapter of the Gospel of John, where he incorporates Platonic language, consciously incorporates Platonic philosophical language in order to describe who Christ is. And Christ is, in that sort of flat English translation, the word, but the reason, the rationale, the plan, the idea of the entire universe. And that forces us to confront the tradition that those words come from. There was a movement 100, 150 years ago to say that, oh, Greek thought had polluted Christianity. And they would point to a couple of these scattered early church thinkers like Tertullian. I like the way that Jordan put that. Tertullian and some other guys. Yeah, it was basically him and a couple other guys. The rest of the patristic tradition, even though they sometimes had misgivings, incorporated this wholesale and incorporated the Greek tradition wholesale. Where they could, elide it with Christianity, and where they could, they disputed with Greek thought. But we're required to do that. I mean, this is not sort of an optional extra because we think that Greek literature, Greek history is fun. It makes us who we are as Christians. And the very incarnation of Christ, the logos of the universe, demands our interaction with these intellectual traditions.
Following up on both of you, that's why there is such a concerted effort to gut it from education. Because as soon as you do that, then it's wide open for subjectivism, and the pinnacle of being human is pleasure and is self-determined. It's very deliberate, and I love that my children and Kolbe students and Kolbe families and Kolbe parents are not only being protected from that effort, but given the tools that they need to combat it.
I was just going to add, and I don't remember where I read this the other day, but we got to keep in mind that the first 3 centuries of the Christian church, they spoke Greek. They weren't speaking Latin. Latin comes really sort of 5th century and beyond. They're predominantly Greek speakers. And it seems to me we forget that. And in forgetting that, we miss a lot of the connections with the early Greek philosophers as a result, I think. So that was just something that came to my mind as Don was speaking.
That's interesting. That's interesting because the 2 that I named are Latin writers, and one is the first, Tertullian. So maybe the early Greek writers, maybe they never saw this break. I don't know what those motivations were from Tertullian. I can't nail them down, but this sort of fear of paganism, but maybe partially it's this disconnect linguistically. I mean, he was the earliest Latin Christian writer.
Well, I mean, he also wrote this when in his heretical period, so he was not Orthodox at the time that he wrote that. He was in his puritanical period, which wants to simplify and get back to the roots of things. So I don't think there's anything particular about Latin, because the Latins had eagerly imbibed the Greeks as much as the Christians did. So I don't think we can attribute it to that.
Yeah, it is interesting because even that movement was sort of almost like a Protestant idea of to get back with this, and that's what the Protestants sort of did in the 16th century. It was like getting earlier and earlier, that continued all the way down to the historical Jesus idea and this kind of thing, where it's even earlier and earlier and earlier. And I wonder if students, and maybe Michelle, you may have some insight on this with teaching your classes. I just wonder if students can recognize the significance of what they're actually reading and what they're doing. How do we even have these texts that are over 2,000 years old? Does that make an impression on students in your experience?
I think it makes a huge impression on them. I've been able to sub for Ellen Finnegan in her Greek literature classes a couple of times now. And it was about halfway through the year both times, and it ended up being the same exact lesson plan both times. So we were both kind of chuckling about that. But they are so hungry and thirsty for this, and are so fascinated by somebody mentioned treasure earlier. I think you did, Stephen. They recognize it as the treasure that it is, and they have this fire to just go deep with it and pull it apart and examine it in light of their other classes, in light of who Jesus is, in light of what's going on in our world today. And there's this great reverence and awe from them that I see that was just even subbing for those couple of classes and seeing my own son's reaction to these texts when I homeschool, use this in our homeschool curriculum. I'm really excited about Greek literature this year and kind of giddy over getting to spend an entire year week by week with them on it. So I think they definitely recognize the dignity of it because it's so drastically different from what the world is offering them. It's so drastically different from a lot of things that they're reading and seeing in our modern culture today. So it's beautiful to see their respect and their awe over it and their, like I said, their hunger for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love how you put that, Michelle. They're enthralled by it. And I think, and one of the reasons I think that they are so enthralled is that we're giving them the text. We're giving them the primary source. We're not giving them a textbook that says, go learn about the Greeks. No, they're connecting with these people. And so many of the kids, and this happens with our other primary source classes too, they're like, wow, I feel like I know them. I feel like I could be sitting in a room having a discussion with them. I could be one of the interlocutors sitting there, and having this great debate. They really, because we're doing a primary source text class, and every so often I'll have people like, what do you mean you let ninth graders read Herodotus? Why would you do that? It's like, no, it's important. This is the first, it's a translation, but it's the first one, and this first history, and they're becoming friends with these people in a way through these texts. And so I think it can be daunting for students and parents at first, but between whether, and I know, Michelle, you had this experience, I homeschooled my own kids with this before I was teaching at Kolbe as well, is the course plans at Kolbe are so good at sort of giving those highlights and laying it out and letting them really connect with it. And of course, in our online classes, we have our teachers, which are trying to, facilitate these discussions with the students, but it's the texts themselves that are getting, and the kids get excited about. They feel like they're part of it and they're part of this world. And so it helps them to recognize it.
I saw that last year in homeroom as well. I had 2 homeroom 9 sections last year, and the second half of homeroom is a study hall. And so you have little text boxes set up in the Adobe Connect classroom that are subject specific. And man, those history and literature chat boxes were constantly on fire. And they're like, can you believe that he did this? And have you read Herodotus yet this week? And I mean, it's really amazing how excited they are over it. And they make little inside jokes about it, and they come up with these key phrases that they toss back and forth for the rest of the year. So yeah, it's very exciting to see their enthusiasm.
They've made it their own. They've
Yes.
made it their own. And yeah, this past year, they were very excited. They were constantly begging for more discussion boards so they could keep talking after class because they really enjoyed it.
Can't tell you how many ancient Greek memes my son has created this year.
What a contrast all of this is to what I think about, the common ideas today, basically that the kind of that Hegelian sort of the world is constantly progressing, at least that world spirit sort of idea. And today, largely that it's really impossible to actually have knowledge about things, that you don't actually know. And then to go back to the Greeks, where they're clearly superior thinkers to most of us today, at least, and the idea that you can come to knowledge from, even, as I guess it was talked about as well, even outside the faith, you can just I remember reading through Aristotle, many years ago now, but just being astonished that he can come to the idea of the unmoved mover, that there is a God, and kind of throwing up these questions like, well, is the world's either eternal or it was created, and here's the arguments for both, and I'm going to go with it, it's eternal. But you think, well, okay, you recognize the two logical options, and then you picked one, and I was wrong, but then I can't imagine what our church today would be like with St. Thomas not having the Greeks to pull from. I mean, the richest source of that we have in the Summa and the other writings of St. Thomas, it wouldn't be possible without standing on the shoulders of the earlier giants, I guess.
I mean, that's true, that we tend to forget that all Western thought, not just Christian thought, but all Western thought until the 19th century was embedded either with a background of Plato or of Aristotle. All Christian thought was Platonic up until the 12th century, until St. Thomas and his scholastic friends come. So much so that Alistair MacIntyre, the philosopher, can say today, well, really, there's only two choices. Either you're on Aristotle's side or you're on Nietzsche's side. Those are the two choices you have today. Everything can be boiled down to those two. And giving our students, and I know Carl read in Modern, I was so impressed with the philosophy class that was offered by Kolbe this year. And we're presenting our students with that. We're giving them the tools so that when they get into a broader world, when they get into a university world, they're not going to be lost. They're going to have bearings.
That just immediately made me think of the Nicomachean, if I've said that properly, ethics, which are so beautiful. Again, reading something ancient that basically just can completely lay out why our Christian ethics aren't only, well, we can see clearly by reason that these aren't just arbitrary rules or something imposed by religion, but this is the way to happiness, and that's what all men seek. And that they had that down. We keep forgetting it, obviously, but it's been around for thousands of years. Outside of faith, you don't need the faith to even come to that same conclusion. It's just, again, incredible.
It was one of the highlights of the philosophy class that the students didn't appreciate the modern thinkers, at least until we got to Joseph Pieper, Maritain, and John Paul II. Leading up to, well, they liked Kierkegaard too, but the other guys, Mill, Nietzsche, they could see right through that stuff. They saw right through it. They saw what it amounted to, and they didn't appreciate it. So that was a joy in the second semester.
That's a great validation that that they're reading things rightly. I want to switch a little bit here and see if we can give any tips that you might have, especially from the teacher. All of us are educators here. How can you do some of the practical things? Let's say somebody's listening to this episode and they're not going to have the benefit of being in the online classes this year to partake of the Greek year. They're going to be doing it from home, reading original sources. Maybe the parents haven't read some of these sources, and all of a sudden it's up to them to provide this to their children, answer questions, those sorts of things. What kind of tips can you give for the really practical, how to make a reading schedule, and then how do we stick to it, and who do we go to for answers? I mean, you can email if Don Prudlo wants to give his personal email address, maybe can email him with any questions you might have. But what are some practical things that you might suggest, Therese?
Yeah, I'll post his email for you later, so you can, all my students can email him. It's a great idea, actually. I'm going to start adding that to my syllabus. So practical ideas, I mean, with our students and our families that choose to do it homeschool, with our homeschool course plan, it's okay to take your time and to look through the material. Use we've taken a long time through the years sort of fine-tuning those course plans and our different sources that we have for our families. And so take the time, read. I would always recommend read through the course plan, sort of the background information first, sort of get your bearings. But then, don't be afraid. Jump right in and take it in small bites and just start reading Herodotus. It's a great story. it's exciting. And so if you're afraid, just make sure they're breaking it up in small chunks. Maybe start by reading it out loud together as a family, just to get started with it. And so everyone can sort of get the sense for the flow of the narrative and the literature and his way of speaking. And I think after you do that, maybe especially for the first week or two, and the students they're going to build confidence in reading it together with their family, and the families will build confidence that, especially if something that either it might be the first time for their parents to have read it, or it's been a number of years since they read it. Maybe they read it in college. So yeah, just take your time and in chunks, take it in small chunks. That would be sort of my first tip for them. And you'll find that it'll start to flow. I'm sure Michelle has even more. She is the master at the homeroom study guides for all these kids.
I love the idea, Therese, of reading it out loud as a family. We're a big read aloud family. Most nights we have read aloud time with all of our boys. And I think that it helps them to hear maybe you're stumbling over the language a little bit initially, and they see it that this is a family effort, that, okay, it doesn't have to make sense to me as soon as I start reading it. I think that most students nearly universally acknowledge that after reading it for a few days or a few weeks, you get into the flow and you get used to that musicality of the language of that particular author. So I love the idea of reading aloud. I love the small chunks idea. My family, we're a huge family dinner family. And so family dinners are the place where I'm saying, so, what did you read today? What did you hear? What really struck you? And really, they don't need a whole lot of prompting from me anymore. We've been doing this homeschooling thing for 2 decades now. So they don't need a whole lot of prompting. But when you're first starting out, don't be afraid to just leave it in their court. Trust me, very few of the 9th graders this year had ever encountered the classics before, and it didn't take them long to get really excited about it and jump in. So ask them what they heard, what really stood out to you, whose actions stood out to you, what turns of phrase stood out to you. And they might be a little quiet at first, but find a time, really, if you can't do it daily. We do morning meetings in my house, although as my teaching schedule has picked up, sometimes they're afternoon or evening meetings. And I'll sit down for, even if it's just 10 minutes, with my older children who've been working mostly independently that day, and just have a discussion, see what's on their mind. And they have so much to share. And the more times that you do that as the parent teacher, the more comfortable that you both get at it. And don't be afraid to use, Kolbe has amazing resources. We have those study guides with answer keys. We have the classics conference recordings to listen to. So even if you're listening to that while you're cooking dinner, or getting up a little bit earlier, or taking a quick lunch break and reading some of those things, to have it become a part of the rhythm of your family life will really help a lot. And it's important to recognize and for them to see that you're going on this journey together.
I think Kolbe has a big advantage too, in that it's a Catholic school, and that we can emphasize that there's not just practical virtues, but there's intellectual virtues as well. These tasks, these are hard texts. They're difficult, and you're meant to struggle with them. And in so doing, you are going to acquire virtue and merit. Your study is actually a good work. Your study is actually meritorious. God can be found in a classroom. And so this is something we need to, especially so many of our students are so good and pious. There's an old Dominican phrase that I really like, that for the intellectual worker, for the student or the teacher, the wood of your desk is the wood of your cross. And so that's something I think that we can help teach our students.
I remember going through that process myself. I hadn't really been exposed to the classics until I went off to Thomas Aquinas College as just graduating from high school. And what a good thing our students here at Kolbe have, that they're starting to develop those virtues, those habits. And I loved the bit by bit sort of thing, because for me, I read a lot, but I was reading mostly, science fiction, fantasy, modern sort of stuff, which is candy, sort of like, it doesn't, for the most part, not something that challenged me. So going in, it reminded me kind of, and looking back, it reminded me of working out, like when you're starting exercise, and at first it's just painful and exhausting, but if you just do it little bits and a little bit, then eventually you build up that strength, those habits, and yeah, what at the beginning of the year was nearly impossible, it becomes very doable then. But the fact that our students are getting this in ninth grade is amazing. It's fantastic.
That's excellent. I guess I want to start kind of wrapping up here. If we could go around and each of you maybe mention your first encounter with the Greeks, or maybe not the first, but something that really stood out to you. If you can think about that for a moment and see if you've got something to say, inspire the listeners to, if they've never encountered the Greeks, why they should, where they might start, something like that. I'll go first, give you some time to think about it. Maybe some of you already know exactly. But I guess mine was in college, my first year of college, when they still had Western civilization courses. And it started with the Greeks. And it was just a history course. And I was very interested in all of it. And I was really drawn to sort of what they call like the material history, and what kind of houses did they have. And this is very, very early stuff. And I was a music major at the time, and there was a really good library on campus for music collections and things. And so I kind of did a little project, me and another guy. They let us partner on this project where we looked into what ancient Greek music may have sounded like. Of course, there's no way you can really know, but they reconstructed different things to sort of make a plausible case. This is somewhat what it might have sounded like, and so that was really interesting, because it brought it to life in a way. So any artifacts I could get my hands on, or then being able to hear the music, it really got me interested in history in that sort of way, in a way where you can bring to life something from the past. And I was just blown away by it. I had not read anything from the Greeks in all of my unschooling high school days. So this was brand new to me, and in some ways put me on a course that I still haven't left. So that's my experience, my first encounter with really being inspired by the Greeks. I don't know if any of you want to jump in next.
Well, I'm not going to pick one. I'm going to pick three. The first one is in my introduction to philosophy class at Christendom College. We read the Trial and Death series of Socrates, and we started with Euthyphro, which a lot of people sometimes leave off, which is a dialogue of a son bringing his father up for trial, and Socrates being absolutely shocked at this and asking a question that seemed to me at the time to be circular. Is something holy because the gods love it, or do the gods love it because it's holy? And it turns out that question asked at the very beginning of philosophy is one of the key, most fundamental questions that's ever been asked, and has been fought over from that day to this. That opened my eyes to a whole new world. The second is, and I probably shouldn't be saying this since my wife is on the call, I have an ancient crush, and her name is Antigone. I love her. I love her character. I love that play. I love all Greek drama, but that play in particular, and her consistency and her courage is something that speaks to me across 2,500 years. And the third, going back to your idea of material culture, we shouldn't forget that the Greeks produced beautiful things as well. And I can't tell you how many times in Rome I've stood before the Capitoline Venus, which is a copy of Praxiteles' original Aphrodite of Canidius, and just been absolutely beside myself with emotion, looking at this beauty and what the Greeks were able to do and capture, and then bequeath all of this to Christianity. So sorry, that was a three-part answer to a one-part question.
No, very good. I I already knew about Antigone, so so I was already aware. Yes, we're big fans in our house here. For me, I have to go. It started in high school for me, and it came back to what is still one of my first loves, which is art and architecture. I had during my unschooling portion of my high school career, similar to Jordan's, but I was really lucky to, we had a local parent who brought us all together and gave us the most fantastic history of art and architecture class. And I still remember it to this day. I still have books from it that I do with my own students. And I just remember being enthralled by all the achievements the Greeks had. And that sort of got me started to think about them and to delve into them. I had older siblings that were in college at the time that were reading these great works. They were coming home and talking to my parents about it. So I was hearing it. And yeah, when I went to college, I was just hungry to learn more. For me, really the literature. I loved reading Homer. I thought I was like, wow, this is so much fun. Why didn't we read this earlier? Why didn't I know about this before? And what a great story. And then delving into the histories and so on and so forth. And I had someone ask me the other day, how is it when you reread Herodotus every year? I said, I can't wait to reread it every year. I said, if I ever didn't teach this class, I think I might still go back and reread it. Herodotus and Thucydides and the Republic and all these things. I said, it's always something new. It's like visiting with an old friend all over again. And yeah, so those are sort of my early takes on it. And it keeps driving me through today.
I'll jump in. Despite the fact that I look very young, when my brother came home from Vietnam in '68, he started taking me to local bookstores that basically sold Eastern books on religion. Well, I started reading that kind of stuff. I'm junior high-ish age at that point, but they kept pointing at the Greeks in a lot of that. So all of a sudden I'm starting to get interested in the Greeks, and I'm in junior high school. And I found them kind of interesting. I didn't know what to make of them, but I did find them kind of interesting. Jump forward, I decided after 3 years of being a music education major that there were people who really had talent. I wasn't one of them. So I changed my major to philosophy. And one of the first classes I took was ancient Greek philosophy. And you got to imagine in the mid 70s, some of your teachers fresh out of grad school were kind of different. And I had a kind of different associate faculty member, cool guy, I guess. I don't, but he got me interested in reading the Greeks. So I read the Greeks, and once again, I started making connections. It's kind of interesting stuff. Now you jump forward, and I'm teaching classes, maybe as a part-timer, maybe it was after I was full-time. And so I started teaching the trial and death of Socrates dialogues, the Euthyphro, the Apology, the Credo, the Phaedo. And these are great dialogues, just fantastic. And then finally, this is 4 parts. Finally, I started teaching the Republic. And what I would do is I'd spend about 12 weeks in a semester. We're going to read the Republic because it introduces all the major questions in philosophy. So I started teaching the Republic, and I probably the last 5-6 years that I was teaching at the college university level, I'm teaching the Republic every semester in my intro classes. And the more you teach that work and the more you teach the Platonic dialogues, if the Greeks aren't where it's at in philosophy, then, I don't know. I know there are guys out there, the German Enlightenment, that's where it's at. No. It's the Greeks. You got to read them. So it's sort of a lengthy trajectory for me, but it's been an evolving love story, so to speak, especially with Plato. Aristotle, Not as much, but I like Aristotle. He's just really hard to read sometimes. But Plato, the Socratic dialogues, that's the stuff. That's the stuff. And that makes reading St. Augustine so much more interesting to know Plato. So that's my story.
For me, it was Greek literature. I'm a story gal, always have been since I was very little, but particularly Penelope. So I had never read the Iliad until high school. I went to an all-girls Catholic high school. I graduated in 1990. And so that just tells you right there, like we had no idea, even going to a Catholic school, who we were as women, as young women, just no idea. And, I won't get too far off on the tangent, but I kind of, like I said, it was an all girls school. And so we read the Iliad and we were like, oh, these stupid men. Like that was our initial reaction to it. Like, seriously, get a grip on yourself. But we got to the Odyssey and I already knew, like, I was like, yeah, family and all of my students out there, please don't be scandalized because you know that I did not stay this way. But in high school, I thought to myself, marriage, children, all of that can wait. I'm going to have a career, right? I'm a smart person. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to establish myself as this scholar and teach at a university and write. And, who needs marriage and children? Like I said, no clue who I was as a woman. But Penelope fascinated me because I thought, she's subversive, right? She's subversive. And looking back on it now, I see that I think what was appealing to my heart, to that part of me that was formed by our Lord, is that she was subversive within the living out of her vocation, right? She didn't step out of her vocation. She didn't step out of her femininity to be subversive and to protect herself and her son. And eventually, as I came back to the church and recognized my dignity as a woman and embraced my vocation as wife and as mother, I see her as just this beautiful portrait in Greek literature of the feminine genius. And so there's a book idea for you, those of you who write. I would love to see something about Pope John Paul II's feminine genius and Penelope, because she was riveting to me. And so that was it for me.
Circumspect Penelope, right? Yes. And I just got thrown into a Greek year. I went to Thomas Aquinas College, and you start out with the Iliad, the Odyssey, you're reading the tragedies, Herodotus, Thucydides, you're doing Euclid in mathematics, Plato in philosophy, and then the logic books of Aristotle, and then you just kind of keep going from there. So all of freshman year is just filled with this richness, Plato asking questions, the important questions, even though feeling frustrated that the answers weren't there. But, and then wading through Aristotle, looking at every possible way you could make an argument and which versions were legitimate and which weren't. And then, as I mentioned, Euclid was just astonishing as far as being able to establish a process, a science, a logic that went on. But then it got to read pre-Socratics after that as well, and then the physics, the De Anima, the ethics, the metaphysics, and just all of that was just I just converted. So falling in love with our Lord in a way that was different, and then just seeing that this love of the truth and this relentless pursuit of that, how that matched together perfectly, just the seeking of the truth there. I was hooked.
All right, fantastic. From here on my perch in the catbird seat, I want to say thank you to all of you for this wonderful conversation. It's really been a privilege to witness it unfold, and appreciate so much all of your contributions to it and the time you've taken to visit with us. I know it's going to be a great help to our listeners and a fun refresher for those who've been around a while. We would love to hear from listeners about who stands out to them in their reading this year as they're going through the Greek year. We'd like to hear from you guys how that's going. I want to mention, as I usually do, our show notes that we will have available with this episode will have a lot of links to not only the KolbeCast episodes where all these fine folks have contributed before, but also some other relevant episodes that will hopefully be nice companions to this episode. And I wanted to also remind listeners again, or maybe point out for the first time if you're new to Kolbe, that there is a lot of support, as has been said throughout this conversation. Your Kolbe advisors, there are the Kolbe class Facebook groups where the families who are walking this road with you can converse and exchange ideas and support that way. And in addition to the main unofficial group, lots of resources available, starting with your advisors. So please reach out, but sooner rather than later, and instructors as well. However you are making use of Kolbe, know that everyone here is rooting for you and available to you. So Therese, Dawn, Michelle, Carl, Jordan, Stephen, thank you all so much for this fantastic conversation.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Thank you, Bonnie.
If you are listening to this episode when it comes out, come back tomorrow for another episode of the KolbeCast Convention. If you're listening to this sometime in the future, check our catalog in any podcast app or on the Kolbe website to pick another one of the convention episodes, or several, or any other from our growing catalog of episodes. So thanks again.
Subscribe to the KolbeCast on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss an episode. And let us know how we're doing by leaving a rating or a review. And as always, feel free to email us at podcast@kolbe.org.
Mary our Mother, pray for us. St. Maximilian Kolbe, pray for us. Ad Maiorum Dei Gloriam.